Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Today I'm answering a viewer's question about the different levels of judges and how they get appointed. So stay tuned and we'll discuss this down at the beach. Oh, and by the way, I found my favorite sunglasses again. The court system in this country can be confusing, particularly if you've never had to navigate it, and particularly if it's been maybe a year or two since you were in high school. Hopefully in high school you got some of this, and perhaps even in college you got some of it, but a lot of people don't ever get the kind of information that they really need to understand how our justice system actually works. So I'm going to start, and my starting point here is going to be the state of Missouri's court system. I'm going to give you an overview first of Missouri's court system. It will be very similar to most other states. There will be minor differences. For example, in Missouri, we have a unified court of appeals that handles both civil and criminal. But for example, in Texas, they have a court of civil appeals and they have a court of criminal appeals. They do that ostensibly to allow the judges to have some expertise in the area of law in which they're judging, which I think is a good idea. But not all states do that. So we'll take a look at Missouri and then we'll move on to the federal system. Here's an overview of the judicial system in Missouri from the 30,000-foot view. If you look on the left-hand side, and we're going to use the criminal context first, I'll talk about civil in a little bit. You've got arresting officers on the left, you've got the prosecutors in the middle, and you've got the courts that are at issue on the right. So if the city police have a city issue, in other words, a municipal offense, it's tried by the city attorney in the municipal court. If the city police arrest you for a state offense, then move up a line and you have the county sheriff and state trooper. If either of those three arrest you for a state-based offense, then it's tried by the county prosecutor in the circuit court, or in some cases, in other states, the district court. Now in Missouri, we have a little wrinkle in that we have what's called an associate division of the circuit court. And the associate division of the circuit court essentially acts as the entity that arraigns individuals for felonies and can try misdemeanors. The purpose behind that is to free up the circuit court. And associate circuit judges are considered to be state judges. And then we have a circuit court judge. And then if there is an appeal, it goes first to the Court of Appeals. In Missouri, there are three distinct branches of a single Court of Appeals. There is the Eastern District, the Western District, and the Southern District. The Eastern District is located in St. Louis, the Western District is located in Kansas City, and the Southern District is located in Springfield. Those different divisions of the appellate court are all one appellate court with just different divisions. So when someone is appointed to the Court of Appeals and they are asked to go sit in a different district or a different division, they certainly can do that. So let's talk a little bit about the jurisdiction of the various courts. The state Supreme Court has original jurisdiction in several different classes of cases, and those cases are all determined by the state constitution. For example, a question about the constitutionality of a state statute goes in the first instance to the state Supreme Court. Once the state Supreme Court has decided that issue with respect to that statute, then the Court of Appeals has jurisdiction over any further cases that ask that same question or challenge it in that same way. The courts of appeal, however, generally have jurisdiction over most appellate issues. If the circuit court decides a criminal case and decides an evidentiary issue against the defendant, he can appeal that to the Court of Appeals. If the Court of Appeals agrees that the state made a mistake, then the case would be reversed and there'd be no further appeal needed. If the Court of Appeals did not agree, then the defendant would have the right to ask for transfer to the Missouri Supreme Court. But that is a question that is up to the discretion of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court does not have to take that appeal. It can say, no, the Court of Appeals got that right. When I clerked at the Missouri Supreme Court, one of the things the judges were very adamant about is that the Supreme Court is not really there to correct errors. It is there to make sure that the law is correctly interpreted and correctly put forth for the citizenry. As a result, if a court makes an error in terms of how it judges a fact, and it doesn't affect how the law is announced, if it says, for example, that if it makes a decision that the court necessarily disagrees with, it finds that this evidence is admissible in this case. And the court, if the judge was looking at it as an original appellate judge, would disagree with that. Maybe even write a dissenting opinion if he was in the minority. He won't take that case up to the Supreme Court because he's not there to correct errors. As long as the Court of Appeals correctly states the law, then usually the Supreme Court will not take a case. Now, in the past, there have been exceptions to that rule, but for the most part, they do not take every case that an application for transfer is filed in. And there have been people who have said that that's the one flaw in the Missouri Constitution, that you give the judges the right to determine how much work they're going to do. But generally speaking, it is a good idea to have a Supreme Court that exercises its discretion, because otherwise the Court of Appeals doesn't have any reason to exist. It's there to handle the routine work, and it's only the exceptional work that should be done by the state Supreme Court. Now, in a criminal case, the city offense, for example, a misdemeanor or a infraction, is usually handled by the city attorney and taken to the municipal court. If somebody disagrees with the outcome in municipal court, they can take it up to the circuit court. And the circuit court acts as an appellate court for the municipal court. And if they don't like that, then again, they can take it up to the Court of Appeals. That's how it works in municipal cases. In misdemeanors and felonies that are state offenses, for example, if you're arrested by a state trooper and charged with trafficking in heroin, well, then the county prosecutor is going to handle the initial prosecution. If you don't like the outcome, you take it to the Court of Appeals. Now, whenever somebody files an appeal in a felony case, whether it's at the Court of Appeals or at the state Supreme Court, then the state attorney general handles that appeal. If it is a misdemeanor, somebody gets convicted of a misdemeanor and then takes it up to the Court of Appeals, in that situation, the county prosecutor handles the appeal. It is an odd situation that happens, but for the most part, again, it utilizes the resources in the most efficient and effective manner. The civil law process is very much the same. The case is tried first in the circuit court by a circuit judge. Either party can appeal an adverse ruling to the Court of Appeals. And then if they don't like the Court of Appeals opinion, either side can ask for transfer. Now, if the transfer is granted, then the case goes to the Missouri Supreme Court and it's decided without regard to the Court of Appeals opinion. If it is denied, then the Court of Appeals opinion becomes the law of the case in that case and is the opinion that gets, put into the books for people to rely on later. So now let's take a look at the federal system. In the federal system, it really doesn't matter what agency arrests you. If it's the FBI, the DEA, the Secret Service, um, Homeland Security, IRS, whoever, if they arrest you, then it is the Department of Justice that determines whether or not you are going to be charged. And they make that determination in league with the arresting agency, but it is ultimately their decision. And then whether the case is at the district court, which is the federal district court in the state where the crime was committed, whether it's there or at the Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the next level court of appeals in the federal system, or whether it is at the United States Supreme Court, the Department of Justice handles that. When it goes to the United States Supreme Court, there's a special office at the Department of Justice called the Solicitor General, and it is the Solicitor General who handles most appeals at the United States Supreme Court. Now, let's talk about judges. And again, I'll start with Missouri as one example. The municipal judge, again, is appointed usually by the mayor. Sometimes they can be appointed by other entities, for example, the circuit court. But for the most part, it's a mayoral position that is appointed, and the gentleman or lady who is the municipal judge is not considered a member of the state judiciary. The associate circuit judge and the circuit judge in most counties in Missouri is an elected position, meaning they run for the office and the person who gets the most votes becomes the judge. Now, they have to meet certain requirements. They have to be a member of the Missouri Bar, and they have to have been in the state of Missouri continuously for at least 7 years. That means an unbroken point of Missouri citizenship for 7 years. Most states have similar types of rules regarding their circuit judges or district court judges. In Kansas, for example, what would be a circuit court judge in Missouri is considered to be a district court judge in Kansas, as just one example. The exception in Missouri is in Kansas City, which is Jackson County, St. Louis City, St. Louis County. I know that doesn't make any sense, but there are 2 counties that make up St. Louis. There is St. Louis City, which is in the middle of downtown, and then there's St. Louis County, which is sort of the donut around the hole in the donut, which is the city of St. Louis. So that's an odd situation, but that's how that works. Those 2 positions are the judges are appointed by the governor. And the way that works is people put in applications. There are judicial commissions, judicial appointing commissions that determine the eligibility. And then they put forth a roster of usually 3 judges that are for any vacancy, and then the governor picks from that roster. That is designed to keep, for example, a Republican governor from only having Republicans to appoint, because the Judicial Commission usually puts people of different political backgrounds up for those judicial positions. The same thing applies at the Court of Appeals. All of those judges are appointed by the governor. And at the state Supreme Court, all of those judges are appointed by the governor. Now, the state Supreme Court and all of these judges who are appointed by the governor will serve usually for a period of 1 to 2 years before they are subject to a judicial retention election. And indeed, Florida has judicial retention elections for its appointed judges also. The judicial retention election just asks, should Judge Mary Jones be retained in office? It doesn't ask the voters to make any other decisions. And as a result, unfortunately, because many people are unfamiliar with particular judges, people are retained, even though in some cases perhaps they should not be. Where that usually results in turnover is when the judge makes a particularly controversial decision that is not supported by the general populace. In Kansas City, there was a federal judge by the name of Thomas Clark who determined that the taxpayers had to pay for certain uh, desegregation costs in the Kansas City schools. And as a result, there was a circuit court judge named Tom Clark who spent the better part of the year before his reelection or his judicial retention election going out and speaking to civic groups and telling people, hey, I'm not that Tom Clark, which was probably a good thing for him. I happen to know Judge Clark, and I thought he was an excellent judge. Uh, he could be a little salty at times, but he was actually a very fun judge to try a case in front of and to argue a case in front of. So that's sort of the 411 on Missouri's judicial system. Now let's go to the federal system. The federal system, every judge in the federal system is appointed by the president and is subject to the advice and consent of the Senate. Oops, a little bit of a mistake there. I should have said all Article 3 judges are appointed by the president. Bankruptcy judges are not Article 3 judges, and they are not appointed by the president. They are selected by the Circuit Court of Appeals judges who get together and decide who should be the bankruptcy judge. And also magistrate judges who handle the initial appearance in most of the felony cases tried in federal court. Those magistrate judges are appointed by the district court judges who meet and determine who will be the magistrate judge for a particular area. In actuality, how that works is the state senator will send a communication to the White House saying, hey, I'm Senator Jones from XYZ state, and I believe that John Doe and Mary Doe should be considered for appointment to this judicial position. And then the president either accepts that suggestion and puts forth that name, thereby in most cases guaranteeing that that individual will be appointed and will be confirmed by the Senate. Or he may put up a completely different nominee, and in that situation, the Senate sometimes has rules that will keep that person's nomination from ever going to the floor of the Senate. We have an interesting political system in that way. The idea is that senators should be able to keep off of the bench people who have a judicial philosophy that they don't agree with. That's one of the reasons why winning elections is so important if you want to keep the judiciary in a particular way. Now, I want to point out that although Judge Roberts has said that there are no Democrat judges and no Republican judges, that is objectively not true. And it's very obvious when you look at many of the rulings. But I want to make sure that you understand that that is not a bad thing. The way that new ideas get integrated into the judicial system is through judges who are just a half a bubble off from the rest of the judges. And they have novel ideas, and they have beliefs that they think are important and should be considered. And so a lot of times they write those into opinions, and they go up to the appellate courts, and the appellate courts wrestle with those issues. And having a balance, a roughly 50-50 balance on the courts of appeal and the Supreme Court is a good thing. You don't want a Supreme Court packed with all conservatives. You don't want a Supreme Court packed with all liberals. You want a balanced Supreme Court because the decisions that come out of those courts as a result of that tend to be much more fair and equitable and tend to be very good law. And that's not always the case. I can tell you I've disagreed with a large number of SCOTUS opinions. But again, as a general rule, it's a good idea. So the only way for a federal judge to be removed has long been impeachment. But that is not actually what the Constitution says. The Constitution says that a judge shall have life tenure, shall keep that judicial post for the rest of his life, as long as he enjoys good behavior. Well, there is no process to adjudicate good behavior, and so as a result, at least none built into the Constitution, so as a result, they have adopted impeachment and trial by the Senate as a way of removing federal judges who are not fit to be federal judges. Judge Alcee Hastings was impeached and was convicted by the Senate after he was convicted in federal court of certain crimes. Judge Hastings, after he was impeached and removed, then ran for Congress and was elected to Congress. So even after impeachment, there are sometimes other offices that impeached judges can hold. Although I would point out that, at least with respect to the impeachment process, it can be adjudicated that someone can never hold public office again. That seems to have been used very rarely. That is an overview of our judicial system and our courts. It's probably not as comprehensive or at such a in-depth level as would be appropriate for a college course, but it should give you a decent overview of how things work in both your state and federal judiciaries. Now, I would suggest to you that every state Supreme Court has a website. And if you want to know how judges are appointed in your state, that's a good place to start. If you want to know who the judges are on your Supreme Court, that's a good place to start. I do want to caution you, however, that writing to the judges on the Supreme Court and criticizing their opinions is unlikely to have any effect whatsoever. And if you write to the Supreme Court because you know that, Johnny Jones has got a capital punishment case coming up and you don't think Johnny ought to get the Kevorkian cocktail, again, the judges are probably not ever going to see that letter because the clerk is going to put that in the file but not show it to the judge, because the judge has to make his determination on the record, and the record does not include those kinds of letters. And so those letters are not particularly useful for the court. However, I don't want to suggest that it's not a good idea to write to the judiciary and tell them what you think about any set of issues. I think it's absolutely fine to express your opinions to the judiciary. But again, if you're expecting that to sway an opinion, I doubt seriously that that will happen. Well, that's what I have for you today. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments down below. You know all the stuff we always ask you to do. Like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your neighbors friends, all that stuff. I'm happy for you to do that. I appreciate everybody who has subscribed, and I would love to get more subscribers. But I'm not going to bore you with that at the front of a video when I can tell you at the end, if you've watched this far, obviously you like the content, it's been useful. Please, if you have, find it helpful, please subscribe. If you have the opportunity today to go out of your way to do something nice for someone, or to give somebody a pat on the back, or if you see somebody who's having a bad day, do something nice to cheer them up. It really will improve your day as well. Thank you for watching. Have a marvelous day. I'm going to go hang out on the beach. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.